Our next speaker is Rear Admiral Bruce Baffer, who's the Assistant Commandant for Engineering and Logistics of the United States Coast Guard. The title of his talk is Mission Excellence Through Sustainability. Rear Admiral Baffer currently serves as the U.S. Coast Guard's Chief Engineer. He's responsible for all engineering and logistics in support of the service's 23,000 facilities, 230 ships, 1,800 boats, and 200 aircraft. He previously served as the Coast Guard's Chief Acquisition Officer. Rear Admiral Baffer has served in a variety of positions, including Engineering Officer of Cutter Thetis, Executive Officer of Jarvis, and Commanding Officer of Cutters Thetis and Chase. Rear Admiral Baffer graduated from the United States Coast Guard Academy in 1984. He holds a Master of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the University of Illinois, a Master of Business Administration degree from the University of Massachusetts at Boston, a Master of Science degree in the Management of Technology from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and a Master of Strategic Studies degree from the Marine Corps War College. He is a licensed professional engineer and a certified Level 3 acquisition professional. Admiral Baffer.
Good morning. First, I just want to thank Tom Miller for inviting me to speak here today. The Coast Guard's got a very long history with the Graduate School of Oceanography here at URI. We've been sending our young officers here for ocean engineering master's degrees for at least the last 30 years I know of. I suspect it's more like 50 years. So many of URI graduates are currently working on some of our more pressing sustainability problems that I'm going to talk about today. But certainly appreciate having us over here. Today I'd like to talk about some sustainability challenges that are specific to the Coast Guard. A little more tactical than the Secretary, but things that influence us and the things that we have to deal with. But I need to give you a brief overview on the scope of the organization first, our missions and our responsibilities, and our role as a first responder, because our mission demands resiliency, it demands that we've got energy sustainability, and it's all about using sustainability to make us more effective as an operating organization. And then finally, I'm going to touch on our operations and how we replace our aging seagoing fleet and how we're using sustainability to increase their performance. So first off, most folks in here know that the Coast Guard is one of the 5 uniformed military branches. We're the only branch that's not in DOD. We're in DHS. And that works actually very good for us because we've got dual roles. We've got some unique authorities that let us do some things within DHS that we wouldn't be allowed to do in DOD. We've got Title 14 U.S. Code, which makes us a law enforcement organization, so we enforce all federal laws on the high seas. But we also have a military role in Title 10. So our uniformed members, we're on the military pay scale. Our civil servants are on the GS, the regular civil service pay scale. We're multi-mission, military, and maritime. So we operate, but we also regulate the commercial industry. So my world as the chief engineer is on the operations side. My job is to keep all of our assets working, our ships, our aircraft, our shore facility working. We also have the regulatory side. They're the ones giving you the ballast water discharge standards and all the commercial industry regulations that you have to follow. We have to follow those as well, kind of. They don't always apply to us, but we have to be leaders. We have to set the example. So all those issues that you have to deal with in your jobs every day, I have to deal with in my job every day, and then try to make it compatible with the Navy's fleet. So it's a balancing act that we go through. We've got 36,000 active duty members, 7,000 reserves, 7,000 civilians. We have 30,000 volunteers, Coast Guard Auxiliary. I suspect there's some members in the audience here that are members of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. We certainly appreciate their efforts. We have a $10 billion budget annually, an operating budget, and then we usually spend about $1 billion. This year was about $1.9 billion on capital replacement budgets for new ships, aircrafts, and shore facilities. We have 11 statutory missions. Most everybody in here is familiar with them. living marine resources, fishery sustainability. We don't write the fish rules, but we enforce them. Marine safety, commercial industry standards, DoD support, defense readiness, drug interdiction, a growing business for us right now. On one hand, the good news is business is good. On the other hand, the bad news is business is good. There's a lot of drugs coming up through the transit zones, and we've got some new assets that are getting on it, but we have a lot of drugs flowing right now, and that's where we're putting a lot of our resources to stopping that. On an average day, we execute 45 search and rescue cases. We save 10 lives, $1.2 million in property. We'll seize 874 pounds of cocaine. That's every day. We'll interdict 17 undocumented migrants, do 24 security boardings, screen 360 merchant vessels before entry into a U.S. port. We'll service 82 aids to navigation, investigate 35 pollution incidents, and 14 marine casualties. And we facilitate $8.7 billion of commerce through our maritime transportation infrastructure. I know this is an eye chart, and I don't expect you to have to read everything, but what I wanted to show is how widely spread apart we are. When you look at the Navy's footprint, they mass into big bases. They have very large centralized bases. We're spread out all over the country, throughout Southeast Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, Puerto Rico. It kind of goes back to the early days of the Coast Guard, where you were rowing and sailing to do rescues. You had to have a station every 3 miles, then 5 miles. What's happened now, though, is we've got high technology, Rescue 21. We've taken the search out of search and rescue. Now, if you call us on VHF radio within 20 miles, we just come get you. We know where you're at. Because of that, because of our aircraft, because of our ships are faster, our boats are faster, we've got more footprint than we need. We don't need stations every 5 miles or every 10 miles or every 20 miles along the coast. We can consolidate our footprint. Unfortunately, tell a local congressman we're going to remove your local Coast Guard station, and we have more Coast Guard than we need. But the point of this chart, though, is to show where we're at. We're everywhere. This means that every time you hear a hurricane hitting landfall, it's guaranteed to make a direct strike on one of our facilities. Guaranteed. We're going to be the first to get hit. Our facilities and ports are vulnerable. Many of them are historic. They're in floodplains. They're all along the coast. Many of them are in very high-priced, expensive areas, low-lying areas. They lack redundancies. And we're the first to get hit, but then we're also the first responders. So think about the fire station that burned down, and then you call them to say, hey, please come put my fire out. That's exactly what happens every time we have a hurricane. So disaster response is a primary mission for the Coast Guard. I'll just go back. These are some pictures from August 29, 2005, when Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, causing $108 billion worth of damage. 1,833 people perished. That's within the continental United States in that one storm. The Coast Guard saved 33,500 lives. Our facilities, now I'll go into some detail in a minute, they were pretty much decimated along the Gulf Coast. Saw the storm coming. We flew the aircraft out of harm's way. As soon as the storm passed, all those aircraft flowed back in. It was the largest response recovery effort in Coast Guard history. We had 5,600 members involved from all over the country. And that's where those unique authorities that DHS has. We didn't have to wait for a presidential declaration of emergency or a disaster declaration. DoD has to wait for that presidential declaration before they can flow in to give civil support to civilian authorities. That's our job. We flowed right back in. We didn't even tell the guys to do that. The aircraft just came in and started working. It's not a secret that the initial response right after Katrina was not a shining moment in our government's history, but the Coast Guard did perform quite well and did well with that. But being a first responder is difficult. Like I said, when your infrastructure is the first to get hit. This is a picture of Station Gulfport, which is down there on the upper left-hand side. That's what was left after this storm, and so obviously that was a complete wreck. after a storm, first our job is to assist those in need. But then the next piece is to reconstitute the maritime transportation infrastructure, because you need that maritime transportation, those pathways. You need the buoys. You've got to pull all the wrecks out of the water. You got to make sure you can get in there from the maritime access before you can start bringing in supplies and everything else you need to recover from a major event like this. So this is Station Gulfport after Katrina. We had to reconstruct it. That's it in the bottom level there. $70.5 million to rebuild it, 2,600 square foot building. It's built now to withstand a storm surge from a Cat 4 hurricane. It's LEED certified, and it's certified for 160 mile an hour winds. We can't lift everything up higher than we're going to need to do with stormwater rise. This is going to be a recurring problem for us. We can't get everything high enough. But the first floor is designed with shops and locker rooms and breakaway masonry walls. So when the next storm surge comes, the walls get blown out. It reduces the lateral loads on the building. The first occupied floor is the second floor. The other lesson we learned is having an emergency generator doesn't do you any good when the tank is down on the ground level. Now all your fuel is floating around in the floodwater with everything else, causing more of the problem that you got to clean up. So the emergency generator is up on the second floor along with the fuel. It's 24 feet above sea level. It's set for 6 days. The idea is they can operate independently without external support for 6 days now, and after 6 days it's already wired, so we'll have our assessment teams coming down from elsewhere in the Coast Guard with larger generators, and they can plug right in, and then they'll be able to have full load for as long as they need to after that. But they're set up to be able to operate by themselves for 6 days. In fact, on the second floor there's a hatch in the floor, so when the first floor blows out and they have to come reoccupy the station, they can come up through the floor through the hatch and not have to mess with any debris that may be around floating in there. So we've actually got emergency access back into the station after the first floor gets blown out. In fact, during 2008, while it was being constructed, it was hit by hurricanes Gustav and Ike. So we didn't even get it open before it got hit by 2 hurricanes, and it worked as designed. We lost some construction material that was still laying around, but as far as the building goes, it worked as designed, and we had no damage. But this is just one example of what went on. We had stations like this all along the Gulf Coast, and it's not just Katrina that was a big event, but October 29, 2012, Superstorm Sandy, we already mentioned, made landfall near Atlantic City, and that caused $170 million in property damage. In fact, we had damage right up here at the Coast Guard Academy. Some of that money we had to spend to fix some things at the Academy there. But we lost whole stations after that. All right, so rebuilding above a 500-year flood elevation is where we're doing it now where we can. You can't do it everywhere, but this is not the first time we've had to relocate essential facilities. This is Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, a very historic lighthouse. Many of you probably have seen it. 1870, when it was built, it was 1,500 feet from the shoreline. By 1970, 100 years later, it was 120 feet from the shoreline. This is down in North Carolina. So it's a 4,830-ton lighthouse. Moving lighthouses is tough. It's a good ocean engineering technical challenge. They weren't made to be moved. They're not mobile by any means, but we were able to do this successfully. It was 7 historic buildings. We moved it 2,900 feet away from the shoreline, and then reattached everything in the same spatial relationship. So historically they look just like they were before we moved them, except for now they're 2,900 feet away from the shoreline. Right now it's 1,600 feet away from the shoreline. It's supposed to be good for another 100 years, but that calculation was done before sea level rise, before global warming, before any of this is going on. So we'll see how many years we get out of it. But we know how to move it now. Closer to home, this is a Gayhead Lighthouse out on Martha's Vineyard. We're losing the bluff at 2 feet per year, just regular erosion. Last summer we moved it 129 feet. It's cost $3.4 million. It's a 500-ton structure, so this was a lighter load. 2013 it was only 46 feet from the edge. Now we've got 129 feet away. But again, as sea level rise keeps happening, this is going to become more and more of a bigger issue for us. Okay, so let me talk about operations though. We operate pristine environments. These are some of our polar class icebreakers. Polar Star just returned from Antarctica, just finished deep freeze. They are not very clean ships. They were state of the art in the late or early 70s when they were designed. They've got gas turbines, the same gas turbines that you used on Boeing 707s. When was the last time you saw a Boeing 707 fly? You know, we just don't use that technology anymore. They're not particularly clean. As we recapitalize our fleet, that's where we're spending the $1 billion a year to recapitalize our fleet. We're going with more energy sustainable or better engineering systems to be more sustainable. One of the things we're trying to do is get away from gas turbine engines. Gas turbine engines burn a lot of fuel compared to diesel engines. What we find in the Coast Guard is we have 3 speeds: flat out when you need the gas turbine, transit when you just got to get somewhere economically, that's when you use your diesel engine, and then loiter. We spend a lot of time going slow, waiting for a case to develop, waiting for something to happen, and what we found is we didn't design very well historically for that slow speed operation, because the engineering plan is all designed for that top speed or that transit speed. Well, we spend a lot of time in the commercial industry. You don't spend a whole lot of time loitering unless you're doing research. A research ship, I suspect, does quite a bit of that as well. Big engines, big diesel engines, do not like to go slow. It causes a lot of maintenance problems. It's very inefficient. And so what we're going to now is using a technology that the Navy has developed that we're going to too, and that's putting electric loiter motors on the shafts. So when you are just loitering and you're going slow, you can run your shafts off your generators. You can use the small diesel engine running at an efficient point with the electric motors on the shafts versus having your big main diesel engines idling, and it's going to help us out quite a bit. Other things that are going on is a year ago, President Obama signed an executive order to cut the government's share of greenhouse gas emissions by 40% in the next 10 years, based from 2008 levels. So I suspect the Navy's got new targets, we got new targets, as well as 30% of all electrical loads demand is going to be from renewable sources. Right now, the Coast Guard gets 7.5% of our electrical load from renewable sources. And with these new targets, we're paying attention to fuel consumption. But one of the things about fuel consumption is when you look at the Coast Guard's fuel bill, 76% come from tactical vehicles, our operational assets, aircraft, boats, and ships. Only 24% come from our shore plant, basically our buildings. Now that 24%, only 1% come from vehicles. Everybody's worried about vehicles, energy usage. We only use 1% of our energy through vehicles. That's not our big target. We're looking at the shore plant at 24%. The really big target is our operational fleet. This executive order doesn't apply to the operational fleet. It doesn't apply to the military vessels, but we're trying to put the engineering changes and the engineering design to make them more efficient. So as far as tactical vehicles, we got a financial incentive. We pay for all that fuel, but we don't have a compliance incentive. Our new polar icebreakers will be built to the Polar Code. We've got to do things as far as discharge, ballast water treatment. We're very concerned about coatings. You go through the ice, you lose your coating. There's no such thing as a non-ablative icebreaker bottom paint. So anything that industry comes up with, we're interested, especially when it comes to icebreakers. And the other thing we're doing is we're deploying within our shore plant the renewable sources, primarily photovoltaic and fuel oil conversions. Right now at the Coast Guard Academy, it's our 3rd largest energy consumer in the Coast Guard. We're switching them from fuel oil in the main heating plant to natural gas. It's still not renewable, but it's a step in the right direction, and we're putting a lot of other efficiency measures into the facilities to try to reduce our consumption. And with that, I just want to finish up with here's our green ship. The original hybrid ship that the Coast Guard operates. You hear a lot about energy density. Well, this is training density. You can pack a lot of cadets into one ship where you do everything manually. Instead of having 10 ships on 10 different cutters, you just put them all on one ship and have them pull on lines. And so we get a lot of training bang from the buck. It's not one of our new ships, but next summer we'll be putting in, not next summer, it's underway right now, but when it comes back from training this summer, we're going to be installing a new EPA compliant auxiliary engine in Eagle, so we'll be increasing its energy sustainability and reducing its footprint. But we're in the environmental business, and we regulate, but we also have to lead. We have to set the example. We've got a culture that wants to do that. We have an organization that wants to do that. So even when we're not required to, we're trying to go the extra step, because we know we can't tell industry to do one thing and then have us do another. So we try to set the example. We do what's right. Funding's always tight. But the key is to try to use these sustainability initiatives such as energy resiliency to enhance operations. When we can tie it to operations and show that we can reduce life cycle costs by using these electric propulsion motors, reduce our maintenance loads, then the money flows. We don't have a problem with coming up with the money, because we're trying to invest to save, and it's all in the life cycle costs. But using sustainability initiatives to try to reduce those life cycle costs is helping us reduce our carbon footprint and be the good stewards of the environment that the U.S. taxpayer wants us to be. Thank you.